Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Environmental Coffee House. I am your host, Sandy Shellis, and tonight, why are fossil fuels not going away? Why, you say? Well, yesterday I started watching videos, and I was watching a lot of the Yakutsk videos. And when you come across those videos, they all tell you how beautiful and everything's perfect there. So I started thinking about this, and when I was dangerous, start thinking, then I start researching. Then I was looking through the books I had on my bookshelves, and I happened to have a couple of books that I used for this. And I realized, I don't see how it's going to happen. I know people are going to try. I never say don't try. I don't tell people anything. But I'm going to tell a story tonight. And let me say hi and thank you, Kim, for moderating. I think Looney Tunes is out of town, so he won't be with us. So, Kim, you got the heavy burden of all these people. So, I'm going to start I'm going to start by talking about, well, we're going to go through a little history and mythology because, well, think about us. Think about human beings and minus, 40 Celsius, or I don't know. I think the one video that I had pulled up said minus 70. It was just a clip. And, oh, Looney, you're here. Okay, great. Looney's here. He's here. Moderating. Thank you. All right. Let me get here because I've got to tell this story. It's humans. Think about it. Did we really evolve like that? I mean, we were Neanderthals, and the Neanderthals, there's recent research about Neanderthals. I think it was 2024. They did it in France, I believe. And they realized that Neanderthals, while they had fire, did not always, it wasn't reliable. They didn't have all the reliable things they needed. And Neanderthals dug the caves. And the caves in the Ice Age in Europe stayed at a relative temperature that they could actually function and live for a long time. And they used heavy they used animal fur. They used all kinds of skins. I mean, it was insane. But then fast forward to the Europe, and fast forward to the Arctic, to Siberia, to northern Canada, and the colder regions. The colder regions, well, they didn't always burn fossil fuels. They weren't like a luxury add-on. They were the pivot point that made permanent settlement in the world's most punishing climates possible, unless you go back to Neanderthal times, which was quite different. And because people were migrating, and they would go where they would find their resources. So today, the planet warms, and climate it's the climate breakdown, obviously it's accelerating. And if you were at the show the other night with Emily Shorning, Dr. Emily Shorning, we talked about acclimating to a 2C world. So it's happening. And the whole world is saying, well, not the whole world, but a lot of the world is saying, well, transition. But if you look north, and you look north, you look in Siberia, you look in Alaska, northern Canada, you see exactly why the world won't simply get off fossil fuels. It's not because we shouldn't. It's because survival history, empire, political power, they're entangled in ways that, people don't want to look at. And trust me, I have so many notes on this. I worked today on this whole thing. I was up at 6 o'clock this morning. I couldn't stop thinking about how I wanted to do this. And I did it. It's a lot of work to pull all these things together, but when you're energized and you want to communicate something, well, that's me. That's me. So I was looking at that because of all these videos that I saw. And we're going to look at a couple of the channels, but they're, oh, it's just so beautiful in Yakusha. And, the people in Siberia, they live in these extreme conditions, but they're so lucky. Well, we're going to learn a little bit. I want to tell you the story. I want to tell you how humans lived before fossil fuels in the coldest regions, not Neanderthals. Basically, before the colonizers exploited the indigenous lands from Yakusha to the Yukon, and why all these same beautiful places anchor massive fossil fuel economies that the global system is not it's not abandoning. Obviously, we just finished COP30. Fossil fuels weren't mentioned. It's not a feel-good story, really. It's kind of like a reality check. So before we had oil and gas and diesel and coal and all that, Arctic and subarctic people, the indigenous populations, they had one formula. It was mobility, insulation, and relentless adaptation. That is a word that we are learning. Adaptation. That's what Emily deals with on her channel. Adapting to a 2C world. Well, here we are. The mobility was people, prior to fossil fuels, they would move with wildlife and with seasons, and they didn't have permanent sedentary towns. They weren't sitting around like I did all day today on my iPad in my living room with the wood stove, which is not a fossil fuel. It's a biofuel, biomass. The heat they had came from wood, some wood, but it came from fat, peat, animal bones, and burned carefully and rationed precisely because this was survival. This is not merely just the bullshit we see. This is real survival that people had to do. They had to. And their shelter, their houses, or they were engineered for insulation. It wasn't comfort. They didn't have all the latest of everything. They had sod homes. They used animal skins. And I learned a lot about some of the things that the materials, which was really actually very cool. And the ventilation. They had to ventilate their dwellings so that they wouldn't suffocate from the smoke. And their food, high fat, high protein diet. Like we always hear about, low carb, high fat protein, but this is what they had. Seal, caribou, whale, fish. This was good metabolic food. And also they got their vitamin D because when there's no sun, bodies evolved. Evolution took us from being dark-skinned with lots of melanin to protect us from burning, and we got plenty of vitamin D from the sun. But as evolution happened, and this took a long time, I mean, thousands of years to go and get to be pasty white, like this, and then you don't get, because you're inside, so they don't get their vitamin D, so they get it from the fish. They get it from what they eat, not from the sun, which is, where people get it. So, but none of the life that all these people lived resembles what's happening now in Yakutsk or Anchorage, Yellowknife, or Norilsk. And Jennifer and I used to do shows, and we used to talk about Norilsk a lot, which is up in Siberia because of the permafrost and how you see what's happening with the thaw. So we move on. We see how they lived. They didn't have fossil fuels. But you see, then came the resource empires and Russia. I'm going to talk a lot about Russia because that's where I was really interested in, because I was watching, and I've watched those videos before of in Yakutia and all, but Yakutia is the Sakha Republic, and it's quite beautiful. In the opening intro that I made, I showed you the map. You saw where it is, and there are the indigenous Yak. Now, if I don't get the names right, I've practiced Yakut, Emk, even, and the Yukagur, and other peoples. There were a lot of people. The Yaks, the Yakuts, they call them. They lived for millennia on these lands. They didn't give it up. They were absorbed. They were coerced. They were violently folded into the expanding Russian Empire starting in the 1600s. Because Russia is a colonizing country. White Russia, not indigenous Russia. 1600s. So Russia's eastwards expansion, it was for the profits, and fur was a big trade then. And then mineral imperialism. So we see this now. We see it now. This is what's happening. Indigenous communities, they had to pay a Yakutsk, a fur tax, believe it or not, or violence ensued. It's not so much different. It's like, okay, the USA. It's like what did we learn? We learned the playbook from Russia. And indigenous communities, are always the ones that lose. So when the Soviet Union, they formalized control through collectivization and forced sedentarization, made them sedentary. And then massive resource extraction projects. And that's where most people today up there do work. They have, Yakutia, believe it or not, diamonds, gold, gas, and oil. It's one of Moscow's it's strategic, right? And they use it. They use these people, they use the lands, and they abuse it. And it's never been worse than under Vladimir Putin. So indigenous autonomy never aligned with Moscow's needs. The land was always valued more than the people. And that is why, indigenous people, well, you don't say, okay, why are they in Russia? They were there long before the Russia that we know today was. It's how did Russia take the lands, empire building, and fossil fuel wealth? And then created this. They created it. So yesterday, when I was thinking about all this and watching these things, I said, the YouTubers, they make it so appealing. And this is particularly, these are Russian YouTubers. And you see this like beautiful, sanitized, it's like a sanitized, it's so great here. You see the winter festivals. I'm sure that, I don't know how many of you have seen those videos. I'm sure you have, because they get millions of views, which I want to dive into a little bit. And they show everything is pristine, and they always start these videos with, it is the world's coldest city. All of them up there. The world's coldest city. But what you don't see, and you'll not see, climate-driven permafrost collapse. In fact, in one of the videos, the gal actually said, when she was showing the buildings that people live in Yakutia, she said the permafrost was melting underneath the buildings because the buildings are hot or give heat. That is the only thing she referred to as to why there is Some of these buildings are falling apart, basically. We know the thaw, but she couldn't say that. She says that literally, I had to rewind it and listen to it again. And I'm like, what's wrong with this picture? Because of the building, right? All right. They can't talk about the failed infrastructure. They can't talk about it. Oh, that's all she could say about the thawing foundations in the sinking houses. She couldn't talk about the military service, a mandatory military service, which I will be talking about, conscription, and who is going to the front lines. Mandatory military service, disappearing indigenous villages, pollution from coal and gas operations. It's not clean. They don't have the kind of laws we had in the United States. And certainly you can't criticize Moscow. It's not accidental. Russia, they don't officially censor YouTube. They can't, but they can't, the creators in Russia that live in Russia, or even that don't live in Russia, like the one I'm going to show you in particular, she doesn't live there, but they can't. They can't because they have to self-censor. They can't do anything. They can't be critical of the state, the war, fossil fuels, conscription, climate collapse. The consequences come fast. I mean, really, literally, they'll be interrogated. They could be fined. Their channels are taken down. Even charges of discrediting the army. If they even talk about that, they even talk about it. So they have to self-censor. So it's always going to be endless positive stories on these YouTube channels, like travel vlogs. They're all travel vlogs and the daily life. Yesterday, I was watching one and it was just lovely. The people have a beautiful house and everything was traditional lifestyle. However, what really got me in this one was it's not traditional. They have vehicles, even though they're crappy vehicles, there's a lot of difficulty with vehicles up there, but they have vehicles. And when the summer comes, they're riding motorcycles. They had motorcycles. They have all of the fossil fuel operated stuff. So it's really sad, but that's what really got me thinking, these people are so used to fossil fuels. It anchors. It's kind of like an anchor to Russia's future and the world in a way. Russia, do they talk about transitioning off fossil fuels? No, not really. No, it's like a billionaire, right? Think about it. Does a billionaire talk about downsizing? No. Because their economy depends on oil, gas, and coal revenues. So many countries that do. In the north, particularly, because they're cold. They rely on fossil fuels. And it's political power. Depends. They depend on controlling the resources. So the coldest regions, Yamal, Yakutsk, Krasnoyarsk, and Irkutsk, they host the very deposits that Russia needs to stay economically afloat. Climate change. And we've seen this. When Jennifer and I used to do our shows, we talked about it all the time. How because of climate changing, because of the global heating, it's opening new shipping lanes, and they're taking advantage of the mining and longer drilling seasons full force. They have no intention of walking away from fossil fuels because it's the spine of their entire national strategy. They are not going to do this, at least while Putin's alive. And yeah, he's older. But then there's going to be another one. Nope. And they're not alone. Every cold nation, Canada, Norway, US, they still lean heavily on fossil fuels for heating, transportation, infrastructure. Canada, there's the arguments about new pipelines right now. And even with their new president or Prime Minister Carney, he's not stopping fossil fuel. No, he's not stopping them. or even lowering them right now. Mm-mm. Canadians in the audience, if I am off, you let me know. So, really quickly, I want to go to show you the. Hang on a second. Hang on a second. Okay, this is the channel, and it's Q and B. And QB has 1.69 million subscribers and 90 videos. So I did a little research on her. She's a native Siberian, and she talks everything is glowing and minus 71°C, coldest place, what I wear, all this stuff. And so I did a lot of looking to see if she, well, where she lived, first of all. I wanted to know if she lived in Siberia or in Russia, and if she got to keep her money. First of all, they can't, and because now, let me pull up. I have another little page of notes on that, on the Russian YouTubers that I put down, and hang on. Okay, they really can't do it like you think, because first of all, they can't get paid directly from YouTube, the banks, everything since the war. But what I really want to find is my notes on the specifics on it, and I can't find them. All right. So what they do, and even though she's not there, you should see the kind of money that this channel earns. It's unreal because she doesn't live in Russia. It's a lot less if you live in Russia. Plus, if you're doing just Russian content, let's say you're doing a video on Yakutsk, and it's you're filming the reindeer, you're filming the ice, you're filming a festival, you never talk about the state. In Russia, if you're just getting just a Russian audience, pretty much you're not going to earn a whole lot. It's all about the advertising and all that. When foreign YouTubers come in, they don't wander around alone, and they have fixers and translators. They have to get permission and cooperation so they can go, oh, it's so cold, and look how tough these people are. Life is harsh, but it's beautiful. So it's like frost and dumplings. I mean, they can't say, oh, grandma says her grandson was mobilized and never came back from the war. Soft censorship. But the indigenous people, forget it. They can't. They are, they want to show these things, but they can't. They're living on a land that's being dug up for diamonds and gold and fossil fuels and timber, and they're living with the damage that they didn't cause, and they very well don't make much money out of it. It's hitting them the hardest. It is hitting them the hardest. Living with higher rates of conscription, because that's who they're taking in Russia. The death rates of indigenous populations are higher than any young people from Moscow or St. Petersburg. No, they've been drafting all over Russia. And it's very sad. And so then I was thinking about, okay, in Russia, when they show on all these channels the land, the houses, whatever. But then I'm thinking, okay, who owns it? And I'm speaking about Russia specifically, but in Alaska and in northern Canada, of course, it's different, but it's changing in the United States. It really is. I mean, in Russia, they are using police and the courts and fear to silence Indigenous people in Yakusha who aren't speaking up. Sound familiar? It's like the Trump administration's taking a playbook from Russia. Now, Alaskans, they're a little bit different. Alaska, the corporations and the economic dependence that they have also keep Indigenous media from going too hard at oil and mining because Alaskans get a dividend. And there's a lot of jobs in oil and mining up there. But they get paid and they get dividends from the oil companies. And Canada has a little bit of a difference. Theirs is a little bit more and I'm talking about for YouTubers that are talking or people talking about what's happening. They have a like a colonial bureaucracy up there and corporate sponsorship. So really, it limits what people are going to say. Different systems, same underlying goal. Don't let Indigenous people fully tell the truth about land, climate, or sovereignty. It's climate colonialism. It's not just climate change. It's climate colonialism. Think about this. Think about it hard. It's like a it's like a YouTube fairy tale. When you watch these, you're watching fairy tales. They normalize exploitation. They hide the front lines of climate collapse, and they turn the Indigenous people into background for scenery for somebody else's brand. Yeah. I mean, we can't even say, who is not being allowed to speak. Right? So that's the creators. And again, Yakusha it's not just the coldest place on earth. Yakusha is a litmus test for what we are really willing to look at and what we are willing to ignore about climate collapse, colonialism, and Indigenous survival. And especially in Russia with this war where they are sending the populations on a disproportionate level than just the white Moscow people. Mm-hmm. It's tough, I think. It is. But you can't, if you talk about the war, or if you talk about conscription, or if you talk about Indigenous land rights, or you talk about climate damage or corrupt, you're going to be charged as being an extremist. See, it's starting to happen here in the United States. Or, God forbid, again, I say it, you discredit the Russian military, or you're spreading false information, or you're inciting ethnic hatred. It's really sad. It really is. So that's, but one video that has 2 million views. I mean, they can make 10 grand, more than that. One thing I read about that channel I just showed you, wherever she's living, she possibly could be making $1 million a year doing those kind of videos. It's incredible. Not me. But of course, our content is a lot different. So, all right. So we're going to move on and let's talk about the world and the population of the world that depends on fossil fuels. Really depends. Siberia's got like 35 million people. Alaska has, and these are I went into different like Statista and a couple of different resources to try to find numbers that I thought were the closest. Alaska, 730,000. And then in northern Canada, the Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, 130,000 people. And then don't forget the Arctic Scandinavia, like Norway. Norway, who extracts. And then, but they're cold. They sell all their stuff, but they're using renewables, but they're still using fossil fuels. But about 38 million people live in these regions where fossil fuels are not they're not simply convenient. They're like existential. And that is how our society, our industrialized society has made it. They stand right on the front line of climate breakdown, and and really simultaneously they're locked into the energy system that fuels it. It's a trap. It's a trap. People are in a trap. So you move on. Permafrost collapse, and it's a future that really nobody's prepared for, although people like Dr. Emily Schorning are trying to prepare people for it. In Yakutsk, there are buildings that stand on stilts because of permafrost. They don't go underground. They can't live underground. They can't dig caves and live underground for warmth. When the ground melts, these buildings, they tilt, they crack, they fall, roads warp, and pipelines rupture. Entire districts sink, but you'll never see that in one of those YouTube videos. Indigenous villages, they face all this erosion and disappearing hunting grounds and the collapsing infrastructure before anybody else does, really. But, but the fossil fuels are the only thing that's keeping the towns heated, lit, supplied. Think about in rural Canada, think about all those places where they have to fly in supplies. I literally went on a canoe trip when I was a teenager in North Bay or Lake Temagami in Canada. And we were canoeing in the middle of nowhere, and they literally flew in and dropped the provisions by helicopter. On a canoe trip for a bunch of spoiled little white brats. Although it was a great experience I had. Yeah. But anyway, so these towns, they're now, it's like, what are they going to go back to being Neanderthals? They're conditioned now. This is the way of life. In the regions, I say it again, the ones that are the most affected are the ones that are the least able to quit or get off or stop using or whatever you want to say. So why won't the world get off? Why won't the world get off? It's like, okay, most politicians, they talk about it, but they really won't touch it because humanity basically modern industrialized humanity built this global civilization on fossil fuels. And all these cold places that people lived, and before fossil fuels, they migrated and they lived, they were nomadic because they went where they could survive the different seasons. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. It doesn't happen. So, I mean, how many, the populations are crazy. And Yakutsk is big for such a cold place, has a lot of people. And transitioning isn't just about technology. It's like, think about this. We talk about renewables and things. And the thing is, you have to tear down the foundation of entire nations. And Saudi Arabia, for example, they are full steam ahead on extracting everything they can. Does the planet need to phase out fossil fuels? Oh, yeah. But the global system built on petrostates with political power, supply chains dependent on diesel, military logistics dependent on kerosene, heat systems dependent on gas, infrastructure built for cheap energy, economic models that punish long-term thinking, which is what we've seen. It's not just an engineering challenge. It's political. It's civilizational. And right now, the world is failing. We have seen that just by this COP30. Anybody out there think the world is not failing at this? Not individual pockets of people. Not those people that want so badly to design things for come up with solutions. There's a bunch of amazing, wonderful, beautiful people that want to. But we're up against these governments that are just awful. And the indigenous populations of the world are on they're in the worst positions. In the United States, I just read a story before this of there was an indigenous actress, I forgot her name, but she was on the show Northern Exposure. She literally got stopped in Seattle. She was walking. She got stopped by 4 ICE agents, an actress, an indigenous actress. 4 ICE agents, masked people. She gave them her Native American identification, and they said, that's fake. Anybody could fake that. They harassed her. She said they've harassed people in her family before. They eventually let her go. Isn't that insane? I mean, this is what's happening here in our country. Russia is way worse. You imagine living in that kind of repressed civilization? Well, that society is coming here. So indigenous people actually they proved survival, it doesn't always require empire or extraction or exploitation. It doesn't. But modern states, modern countries, they built their power on exactly that, turning indigenous homelands into fossil fuel frontiers. And that's what's made people beholden because they have to work. And then, the military is the propaganda around going into the Russian military is insane because a lot of these people don't have opportunity. So they join the military and they don't come home. And Russia's hiding the numbers and they're lying about how many people are dead. But the past shows us we could survive without fossil fuels. The present shows us that our political structures cannot. And it's the contradiction that the world does not want to confront. So I was thinking, okay, looking through this, and I know there's a lot of people that seem to think nuclear energy. Okay, nuclear energy could be the answer. Could nuclear energy be an answer? Could it scale up? And I did some research on that. But no. The new nuclear fission, fusion, could it be deployed fast enough to power Siberia and northern Canada and Alaska? Maybe blunt runaway climate chaos. No. From everything I read, it's not going to be able to be deployed fast enough at a scale required to prevent the worst climate outcomes. It can still play a role. And this is for the people that are pro-nuclear power. I'm just giving you the information that I found. So, but even if it was scaled aggressively today, mid-century warming, it's already locked in. You can't build these things fast enough or come up with the technology fast enough. We're fighting to prevent catastrophic end-century scenarios, not the next 20 years. But nuclear is too slow. It's too politically constrained to be that, the savior that so many people think. So I don't think it would. It can. I mean, they talk about it, the technology. There's the small modular reactors. And then there's micro reactors. And there's the high temperature reactors. And I don't have enough time for that kind of show. And if I was going to, I would bring somebody on. And Russia, they already operate a floating nuclear plant, which is scary, actually. It's called Academic Lomonosov. Yeah, it works, but it is very expensive, and it's not exactly geopolitically popular. So if we were going to use nuclear and we were going to do this, it's just it's too slow to stabilize the climate. We'd need hundreds to thousands of new reactors, mass manufacturing of SMRs, and then the permitting reform. US, Canada, the EU, and capital flows. Not just capital like, what's his name? Building. He wants 3 Mile Island, Bill Gates for his data centers. No, this would be just gigantic. There's not a single commercial SMR in North America. And these designs, it won't even be until the mid 2030s. And then construction. How long does the construction take? 8 to 15 years under current regulatory frameworks? And fusion won't matter before 2045 to 2050, is what I read. So, by the time nuclear ramps up, we're already crossing 1.7 to 1.9, possibly being at 2.0 already. And we're seeing this already, triggering the irreversible Arctic impacts, permafrost thaw, methane emissions, albedo loss, wildfire, all over. Destabilization of indigenous living conditions. And that's all over also. That's not just in the cold. We're seeing indigenous people in South America on the front lines of heat. And the people that are the most vulnerable and the least responsible are on the front lines of all of this. So in the Arctic, it's a bit different. Fossil fuel, it's non negotiable now. When the winter's minus 40 C, forget it. Diesel coal plants, they're like lifelines up there. They're not just luxuries. And renewables, they collapse in the polar night. And long distance transmission is not so feasible over tundra or taiga. It's just not. It's not so easy. Not so easy. So I have some. I'm going to pull up in a minute. I'm looking for something I wanted to show you. Hang on. Hang on. All right. Are you guys enjoying the show? Are you learning? I hope. Learning is so important. It is critically important. All right. Okay. I found a study. Of course, I had to show a study about renewable energy integration in remote Alaska communities. And this was done by the Energy Transition Initiative, the U.S. Department of Energy, which I was really lucky to find it because I think all bets are off now in the United States. But this research, I wanted to go down. They were talking about the approximately 200 remote Alaska villages that are not connected to a larger grid and that primarily rely on diesel generators for electricity. So existing needs and challenges are integrating community scale renewable energy into remote diesel power plants, which can be challenging and if not done correctly can result in negative impacts of the power system. So they did a bunch of case studies, and they did a Nikolsky case study, small little place, and they did They did a bunch of them. I don't want to go through this whole thing. The links are in the show notes. And what I did, I wanted to get to the bottom of it. It's not like it's not being done. But now I don't think the U.S. Department of Energy will be following up on this anytime soon. I mean, it's just not going to happen. But let me go. They did a whole lot of case studies, which is great. And the summary. All right. So in rural Alaskan communities, electricity is typically supplied by diesel-fired generators housed in a local powerhouse. Because rural communities are generally not connected to the larger grid, diesel generators serve as a primary source of electricity with supplemental power provided by renewables in some cases. In many of these communities, renewable energy contribution levels have been limited by renewable energy integration and maintenance challenges. And so the primary challenges to higher amounts of renewable energy integration include ensuring that the diesel generation are not operated at too low of a load, the spinning reserve and heating requirements of the power systems are met, and the existing power plant and distribution system are optimized for such integration. Community capacity to operate and maintain renewable microgrids is also a critical consideration. Remote communities are employing innovative strategies and technologies to effectively integrate high penetration renewable energy projects, such as advanced central controllers, dispatchable heat loads for frequency controls, and the BESS system with grid forming inverters and storage and grid stability. Prior to installing renewable energy projects, reducing line losses and end user consumption can be the most cost-effective first step. So they have to prepare for any of this stuff, okay? Any of it. It's got to be prepared. But again, this was Department of Energy in the United States. I don't think it's going to. Well, they say by implementing these measures and technologies in a careful and holistic way, success stories of reducing fuel use and energy costs in rural Alaska will proliferate. Would we like to see that happen? Of course. It's reducing the use of fossil fuels. It's critical for a little bit better of a life or a cleaner world, so to speak. Then I had, this was going back to Russia's indigenous communities and the war. Again, they have recruited soldiers to fight in the war in Ukraine. It's disproportionate. And this is also in the show notes. They have drawn from the country's indigenous peoples and all over. And they've had really, really disproportionate losses. So in this article, which was back in, this was from the Wilson Center, where I don't know, I mean the Wilson Center, but they talk about killed in action. 252 combat deaths per 100,000 residents. So here's the ethnic Buryats and Russians. In a republic with a population of only 980,000, of which 30% are Buryat. And I read that to you. Compare Muscovites killed in action is estimated at 1,215 when that was done in a city of 13.2 million. 9.2 combat deaths per 100,000 residents. So basically, this is what's happening in Russia. The Kremlin refers to recruit troops from remote, impoverished, and sparsely populated regions, for both political and economic reasons. Russian law prohibits sending conscripts into active combat zones, especially abroad. So the Kremlin then relies on contract soldiers to fill the ranks of those fighting in Ukraine. In these regions, high levels of poverty make outsized signing and death bonuses an attractive proposition because they don't have jobs. Or if they're not in the extraction industry, which is what there is up in those places, they're just going to go because there's a lot of propaganda and a lot of it. A lot. And I just think it's just awful. The smaller indigenous group, the higher the impact of these cyclical recruiting policies. And for some communities, the stakes are existential. Think about it. Small communities wiped out because the men are being taken or conscripted or signing up, whatever, to go, thinking it's going to give them money and a better life. And they end up dying. And they're in this propaganda. So, again, it's sad. It's really sad. And there was one more article that I had pulled up, but I didn't talk about really very much. It was Inuit Circumpolar Council of Alaska. Okay. And this was about food security, how to assess Arctic from an Inuit perspective. It's really interesting. It doesn't have a lot to do with what I'm doing specifically, but I included it because I thought you guys might want to see this in the show notes, because food security also is very important. And this one, understanding the Alaskan Inuit food security, it's pretty cool. So, but I'm not going to go through it because we're almost to a whole hour, which, wow. But do you see why I say that it's not like we're going to be getting off of fossil fuels anytime soon? Are we trying to reduce the use? The jury's out. It really is. It's out for me. I mean, the world is not going to get off. Too many governments, industries, systems, they depend on that. It's an illusion of permanence. We have enough. It's never going to run out. Obviously, they don't know about peak oil. But the illusion that Arctic cities can function forever, the illusion that permafrost is not going to thaw, it's not going to melt, the illusion that fossil economies can coexist with a livable climate. Mm. So I like to use it. I used it before. The North is the canary in the global coal mine, actually. If we want a future where humanity can survive without it, it might not be that tech utopia either. It really is something more like indigenous knowledge systems, local, adaptive, cooperative, grounded in the land, not in extraction. The question isn't whether fossil fuels will end, they really will. But will civilization adapt before collapse? The collapse that's going to force our hand. So you look at the North and you look at Siberia and you look at Alaska and you look at northern Canada and you see exactly what's at stake. Absolutely what's at stake. Humanity did survive before them, and it can survive after them. But it's really indigenous cultures that are going to teach. We may not go all the way back to Neanderthal, but I do think that we are on the road towards something much different. And the tech utopia that these billionaires, these psychopaths all over the world think is going to happen, it just may not. But we always have all these indigenous cultures and ways of living to go back to. If only we would stop stop destroying their cultures. Stop the colonial settling. I won't even go into the Middle East. So let's see for another minute or so. We have comments from you. I did have one from the beginning. Fossils are going away. They call them boomers. Okay. We have to flush something. And honestly, wow, you have a lot of comments in there. I look, yeah, she's right. Look how long these indigenous people have endured and still enduring all the bullshit, every country. Okay. What are we going to flush? Hi, Ernie. You're right, oil's here to the end. Flush human hubris. Okay. Because there's a lot of that, isn't there? A lot of human hubris. Here we go. Flush it away. Humanity's hubris. Yes, that's a good one. I like it. I like it. Well, I want to thank you all for coming, and I hope I gave you some food for thought. It just seems to me after yesterday's day of watching all of these wonderfully glorious videos about life in Yakutsk and all the Arctic places that, yes, it's hard, but my gosh, you see how are they going to do this? I'd like to flush hopelessness, and I'm not hopeless. Where are you? Flush hopelessness. I'm not telling you not to have hope. I'm giving you facts. I'm giving you situations. We can flush hopelessness. Thank you. Okay. I'll see you on Sunday night. I will be doing the show that I've been working on for 2 weeks. Oh boy, I've even found more that I want to talk about. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. It has been lovely. I always like being here with you guys. And I kept it to an hour. And, oh yes, here we go. If you're on X Climate Crisis Club 157 in the morning, you can just listen all day to people all over the world. And they might be different than me or my vision as I went through all this. I personally don't see how we're ever going to do it in time. But, hey, like I said, I don't have a crystal ball or a magic fish. Good night, my friends.